now by a special effects designer and supervisor who more recently has worked on shows such as Game of Thrones, Gangs of London, but it actually all started off for him at the BBC in the visual effects department. So I'd like to introduce Tony Auger. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Hi, how are you?
Not bad, thanks. And you making the most of these rather odd times?
I am actually. I'm actually having a rest because I've just finished off Gangs of London. So we're now having a bit of a rest and we start the next one in January. So there's a bit of insider information for you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing the fruits of your labour for the second series at some point. Was it a particularly complicated show, that one?
Not so much complicated, but full on the whole time. It's just doing mechanical effects, physical effects, loads of pyrotechnic effects, loads of people being shot, and all sorts of other horrible things which I won't tell you about unless you watch it. You won't find out unless you watch it, right?
Yes, Gareth Evans certainly has, the director, quite a style. So if you haven't, viewers, do watch it.
It is well worth watching. It's the script is some of it's very, very funny as well. So believe it or not. Anyway, have a look and see what you think.
But I wanted to take you back to your time at the BBC when you were part of the visual effects department. And then, the department was across so many different aspects, special effects, miniatures. I was wondering if you could perhaps just explain some of the areas that you would have to be a sort of an expert in back in the day at the BBC.
Well, we had all sorts of, we had experts as well, but most of us could do everything from working a lathe, woodworking. I tended to do a lot more in the way of explosives and stuff with a guy called Dave Havard, and going on courses and then teaching on courses and helping him. But other people would go. There was Paul McGuinness was into the and Mike Tucker. Both of those were into the model side of it and also CGI side as well. So there was a complete cross section of people there. And we had people who were really good at model making as well. But that's what they really liked to do. They didn't really like to do very much else. But that was a good thing because that's what we were doing at the time. Lots and lots and lots of models. It was amazing because we had Red Dwarf running. And earlier on, of course, we had Doctor Who models and stuff for that. So everybody was kept really busy. And I think at one point there were 60 of us working all year round.
So that must have been a fantastic environment to sort of start off in then, at a time of, there's lots of visual effects going on, but with so many different people with different expertise.
Absolutely. I mean, you learnt a lot because there were people coming with things that I didn't understand, and especially Paul McGuinness stuff. I mean, I didn't understand any of that at the time. Now, of course, I'm a bit more savvy, but that was good sitting in with them, watching them do it. And I think a lot of people were doing the same thing. Everybody was popping in and out, seeing how they were doing it. And also at that time, costs started to come in, because up to a point, the BBC didn't really have a budget for us. We just sort of went and did it. And then all of a sudden it became quite important to be on budget. So obviously people had to make allowances for that.
So had it always been the plan that you would do visual effects, or did you sort of fall into it?
No, I always want. I'll shorten the story for you. Basically, I was working in the BBC costume department because I couldn't get a job in the film industry because I didn't have a union ticket. So luckily, my boss at the time, a guy called Tiny Nichols, who went in to do all the bonds and stuff, he managed to get me to the BBC. And whilst there, I was working on Doctor Who. And it was a huge robot. I don't even know what it was called. I can't remember, it's so long ago. But it had a 12-volt system of lighting and all that sort of stuff, and it broke. And I fixed it, purely because my father was an engineer, an electrical engineer and a mechanical engineer. And I fixed it, and the designer at the time turned to me and said, well, you don't really want to do this, you want to do special effects. So I then actually went out and went and did prop making for 2 years. And did a lot more to do with fiberglass and moulding and casting and things like that. And then eventually applied again. I didn't apply it the first time. I then applied because then I had some experience and got a 6-month contract, which turned into 18 years. So there you go. That's how it all happened.
So even in terms of the BBC, Doctor Who would have been quite an early job for you then. So I suppose it was inevitable that from the VFX point of view, you'd encounter it again at some point.
Oh yeah. But my first Doctor Who was with a guy called Scoones, who was a wonderful guy, unfortunately dead now. But he used to do drawings on the back of cigarette packets. And I mean that seriously. He'd say, I need one of these. And he'd go, on the back of the cigarette packet. I said, I want that. And he came up with this idea for the round spaceship. Did you ever see that? The black spaceship with I think it's 3 legs on it, I think. And I think this was the one where John Pertwee changed into Tom Baker. There was like a chicken and egg thing because we had various puppets made of puppeterized chickens, which were doing all sorts of good things. But that was also where my career nearly ended because we'd actually, I don't know if you've seen the episode which I'm talking about, I can't remember what it's called. But I think it's the one where they changed from one doctor to the other, so you can look it up. And we had this set on the stage and lots of flames and bangs and stuff like that going on. And then it was all over, everything was shut down, and we went to the bar, which fortunately was attached to the studio. And we're sitting in there having a pint, and Ian came over to me and he said, I think we should go and check on the stage. So I went back in and it was on fire. What it had done is it buried itself, because it was polystyrene in those days, it had actually buried itself in the polystyrene and it looked as if it was all out, and then it burst back into flames. Luckily, the flames weren't that high and the fire extinguisher was all out, but then we actually did open the stage and take all the polystyrene out, so that saved the day. Otherwise, I think I would have probably lost my job. Okay.
Well, I suppose it's only one way, you learn from experience. So working alongside people like Ian and Matt Irvine, you suppose you learn the full history of the department, as well as, I suppose, what challenges television can throw at you.
Well, Matt was great because he was really into space and all that sort of stuff. And we did an awful lot of science programs, which sound a bit boring, but they're not really. Once you get into it, there's so much in there that people don't know about. And Matt would always have wonderful ideas about this and that. And I remember we got the first battery-operated screwdriver, which came over from NASA, I think, something like that. I'd never seen one before. But we watched the space shuttle go up, and as it went up, we were watching it live. He said to me, something is wrong, because he saw, what was the one that blew up? I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, when that went up, he saw something come out the side of it, and he actually said there's something desperately wrong. 2 seconds later, it turned very wrong. Very wrong. So he really does know all about space and all this sort of stuff. And we did loads of Doctor Who's together, most of which I can never remember them all. We made lots of spaceships and all that sort of paraphernalia, lots of space guns. And, that's sort of how it went, really. But we had a good time. And then, of course, we actually, getting away from Doctor Who with Matt, we did a thing called Edge of Darkness, which wiped ITV out. They didn't win one award that year. It was such an amazing thing. And we were the only people that didn't get an award because there wasn't an award for special effects or visual effects. So all the other departments got on. They all went, why didn't we get one? Well, there isn't one. So it's a bit of a... Well, it just wasn't fair, really, was it?
Because I suppose this was a time when, things like Star Wars had not long since been out, so visual effects were starting to become something that people are a bit more aware of, but it still wasn't obviously as prominent as things like costume and hair and makeup.
Well, I had, as far as Star Wars is concerned, Alan J.W. Bell, who you can find out about, who did Hitchhiker's Guide, he'd been out to the States and he'd seen Star Wars before it was released in England. And he came back and said, that's what I want. I want to have spaceships flying around. And we tried all different ways of doing it to eventually figure out you don't move the spaceship, you move the camera. But that was a bit of fun. And that was with, what's his name? Jimmy Francis. Again, great designer, nice man. What did we do after that? I mean, that carried on really, because we did, I think, 2 series of that, if I remember rightly. Now, I worked on the first one, didn't work on the second one. I was off then with Mr. Briston, I think, and we went off to do Fortunes of War. So I was out in Egypt and Greece and the former Yugoslavia. That's how long ago it was. But we had
But as you say, this was a time that the BBC was particularly producing a lot of science fiction, things like Hitchhiker's Guide, Black Seven, Doctor Who, Tripods, Space Cops. There's a lot going on then. So was it quite nice to get those odd jobs that weren't science fiction, comedies and other perhaps more bizarre props rather than model spaceships?
I think your fans will probably hate me, but yeah, it was nice to get away from that and do something for real. I mean, with a colleague of mine, a guy called Martin Geeson, we actually made for Stuart Briston 2 25-pounder guns, field guns, and we actually managed to make them work. They would eject a shell and all sorts of things, and they could be towed. I mean, it was a fantastic job to do. But again, we had all the bits we had. We could weld, we could do all the air, the pneumatic systems, everything, and then work out how much power air we need in the end of it. And the director was so impressed because he was an ex-Royal Artillery, so he couldn't believe that we'd made these things. And that was nice.
Well, that must be the ultimate accolade, when someone that worked with these things is impressed by it. Can't get much better than that, surely.
I think he used it a lot more than he probably should have done because they just look so good. And then we went from there, we went to, I can't remember which way around it was. I think we went from there to Greece and we actually did a massive sequence in a place called Naphthion. We had ACAT guns firing and all sorts of stuff. Lots of fire and supposed to be bombed by Stukas, by the Germans. And believe it or not, the place was actually bombed by the Germans. So we have to be a bit careful about what we did and what we said there. But we had ships on fire and all sorts of things. Yes, it was fun.
Yeah, and certainly making the most of all the different elements of the department. But I imagine, in comparison to something like that, the Doctor Who that you designed, Black Orchid, must have been fairly tame then in comparison.
Well, there was a bit more to it than people realised, I think, because I designed the mask, the guy, and had that made. We didn't have prosthetics then who could do it. I actually went outside and had it done. And then I did all his hands as well, because he had sort of all his bones were all sort of up. And then we had the sequence in the studio where it's all on fire. It was a huge doorway. I set it all on fire, and the stuntman Gareth Milne goes flying through it, and runs away, and as soon as it got cut, as I'm walking towards the door, I can see John Nathan Turner. Do you remember him? John Nathan Turner is running down the steps, thinking we're all going to die because the flames are sort of 3 or 4 feet high. But no, 2 seconds later, it was all out. So he was a very happy bunny. In fact, I got a lovely letter from him saying, thank you for scaring my pencil.
Well, again, you've done the sign that you've done a good job. And do you remember much of the director, Ron Jones? Because he'd done quite a few Doctor Who's.
To be honest with you, no, I can't honestly remember him. Was he a little tubby guy? I don't know why I say that.
I think so, yeah.
I can't, to be honest with you, I can't honestly remember him. I have to say, the crew are all really nice. I didn't have any problems with any of the crew. They're really helpful. And especially in the studio, because they really didn't know what was going on. Because remember, these are not film cameramen. These are people who work in the studio who are running around these huge pods, goodness knows what else. I think they got a bit, it's going to turn very nasty if we're not careful, and they're more worried about their cameras. No, it's fine. But I don't remember Ron James. I was trying to think whilst I'm spouting at you. I don't remember him, I'm afraid. Is he still alive?
Sadly not, no longer with us. But Gareth, the stuntman, is very much still with us. But something like that setup where you set the door on fire and he has to go crashing through it. Where does your process begin with something like that? Do you start by talking to the director, to the performer? Where does it begin?
Well, it starts with the script, really. What do you want? This is what I'd like to see. And then you talk to the director and you say, well, yeah, we could do this. Can we have this? Can we have that? Blah, blah, blah. And I can say yes or no. Or maybe I'd come up with a different idea rather than saying no. And then everything was fireproofed. We actually had the right materials to fireproof the whole lot. And then I actually used the gel to put on it. I was going to use gas, but it just didn't warrant it. It would have been easier with the gel because it's easier to put it all out and stuff. And it looks far nastier. It has that lovely orangey, glowy bits and bits of black on the edges. And I mean, Gareth was fine. All his costume was flame checked. I'd known Gareth for a good many years. I was out in Egypt with us being blown up by us as well. So, we were still good friends at that point.
Yes, you must find yourself working alongside the same stunt performers quite a bit. But it must have been quite nice, as you touched upon earlier, not to be doing sort of pure science fiction, because it was a historical one, all set in a stately home.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it was near Tunbridge Wells, if I remember rightly. On the roof of a building there, we did them running around and him grabbing the girl, and then Peter Davison's come out onto the roof. I'm sure that was Tunbridge Wells. But that was fine. That was just flares and smoke. We couldn't really have any fire there. It's far too dangerous. The house was far too precious, really, to have that sort of thing around. And the weird thing about it is, after that, before that, I worked with Peter Davison on All Creatures Great and Small. So it was like, oh, and we got them pretty well there as well. Nice man.
Yes, because of course it's worth saying that at the time, Television Centre, all the departments were together, and actors would, the BBC Canteen, you'd see people even if they weren't on your show. So it must have been almost like a big family, really.
It had a really nice feel to it. Then, unfortunately, as I said to you earlier on, money started coming into it. And I did, what was I doing? It was Dad's Army, I think. And I spoke to the producer on that. And this was in the 80s. And he said, this is the end. And he was right. Within 3 or 4 years, we'd been moved twice, I think. And it just wasn't right anymore. It was just really sad. Because we'd done some really good stuff over the years. And I can remember them doing Red Dwarf. And when it was done by the department, it looked amazing. And then they went outside. I can't remember what they called now. The 2 brothers who did it, 2 friends, whatever they were. And they started using some bloke in his bedroom to do the CGI. And you think, bye, end of story, really. It's quite sad.
But with the end of the department, and many of you going freelance and still working in the industry, you must still have been bumping into a lot of those people you'd worked with at BBC.
A few, yes. A few of them went on to work for a guy called Mark Holt, who was also ex-BBC, who's now in Mega Pictures, and a few of them have stayed with him. No, I tended to move on to met different people. I'm very lucky. I have a crew of 6 or 8 now that I can call on to do stuff, and then we can get more people in as we go along. But I occasionally, I must say, John Vanderpool is the person I see most of all. I see him in the studios. Especially, I was doing this Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and this car came up behind me tooting and sworn, and it was John. And it was, oh. I hadn't seen him for about 10 years. It's very strange. No, I can't think of many of the others that I've really seen. I think I may have run into Perry once, and that was in Pinewood Studios, and I was working for Rex Associates, I think. But the rest of them, not really, no. I don't really see them.
But of course, television and film constantly evolves and changes. But are you still perhaps drawing on what you learnt at the BBC in the 80s now? Obviously, developed it itself, but that basic technique.
Oh yeah, and there are lots of things. Everybody thinks, oh, it's just another explosion, but it really isn't. Each one is completely different in the way you do it, and we're always picking up new techniques as well. And I forgot what I was talking about. Yes, still using the techniques I learned at the BBC. Because if you've paid attention to the cameraman, we had some really good cameramen, a film cameraman, who would actually show you what lens they were using and all this sort of stuff. And so you became aware of all this stuff and how it could help you. Yeah, foreshortening stuff and all this sort of thing. It always made everything look much closer to people. In fact, it was. And always having explosions coming towards them, towards the camera, not going away, because it always looks crap. But if it's that going towards you, you think, oh, you duck. I can't think what else. And there's lots of other stuff that are there. Lathe work, things like that. I actually have people who are far better than me now who can do all that sort of stuff. And I employ them, fabricators, plasterers. You reach a point where unless you're doing that sort of thing all the time, you're not doing it well enough when you know that someone who does it all the time can do it in half the time that you're taking and do it better. So it's far better to pass that sort of thing on.
Of course. And have you found that, obviously things are now shot in HD and even better, are the sequences and effects that you're asked for more ambitious? Are they is a setup today perhaps bigger than it would have been 10 years ago, for example?
Well, they always want more. There's never a sort of like, oh, we just want that bit. We want that bit, but we want it 3 times that size, and can we have 4 of them over there? It's doing. I forgot what I was doing last. And when we did on Gangs of London, there are sort of going to be a few bullet hits and stuff like that, and they turned down to quite a lot of bullets, and then there were just hundreds of them. And in the floor and the wall and the ceilings, blowing in roofs, all this sort of stuff. So, and you can't just do that just like that, because you've got artists running around. So you've got positioning of artists, and they were artists. They weren't, a lot of them weren't stuntmen. So all that, it's still there's still that tension there of getting it right. And as I say, they always want to make it look bigger than last time. And if you don't, especially with Gareth, if it's too small, he goes, "It's crap, isn't it?" Sorry, I shouldn't have that. Let's do it again. So you just make it bigger. I did a thing called Sharp. I don't know if you ever come across that. It was short beam. I did the last 2 that were ever made. We made them in India, and I was working with Tom Clegg, who's the director. He's about 70-year-old, who's an absolute madman. He's got so much energy. He's running around. He never sits down. We had massive sequences of being attacked by all these people on a castle. I had 300 people crawling up the side of the castle with bangs going off, then rockets over the top of them, all that sort of thing. And that's quite good fun, if a bit dangerous, but but good fun.
Oh, I bet, yeah. And I imagine you must have had a similar experience on shows such as Game of Thrones that are, big productions and famed for their, scales of the battles throughout.
And to be honest with you, I only ever did. I was asked if I would like to go out to Dubrovnik for 6 weeks, or I could go to Ireland. Sunshine or wet and damp and horrible. So I went for Dubrovnik, and I was out there for 6 weeks, and we did lots of stuff, sort of fires and things like that. And a guy being sick, and you could carry on being sick, and the director thought it was hysterical. But we had to be very careful about it's supposed to be filled up with wine. As a punishment, they just keep pouring wine down his neck. And then obviously he's going to be ill, and they wanted more and more wine to come out. And then I actually saw the sequence, and there's hardly anything at all, but when we did it, he would just, it's just amazing. And that was for Stuart Preston, obviously, because Stuart went on to actually run Game of Thrones for years, actually. So that was for him, and he was back in Ireland doing all those big battle scenes and stuff like that.
And you worked with Darren Brown. How does that work, working with a magician? I suppose, are you more making his work a spectacle? How does something like that work?
He was a bit scary, really, because he could manipulate people really quite easily. Have you seen the sequence? Have you seen it?
I've seen a bit of it, I think I have.
With the zombies.
Yes.
Well, that, and the guy who is doing that totally believes that he is being chased by zombies. A lot of those people chasing him were actually stuntmen, and we had them covered in bullet hits. And he could fire the gun, but of course he wasn't firing anything because it was just a compressed air gun. But you see these big bullet hits and everything, and then they go down, and then they'd stand up again. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. And eventually they crowded him into a corner, and then Darren came and sent him back to sleep. Then they put him on a stretcher and took him back into the pub, which is where the whole thing started, with him playing a game machine, and then wake him up, and he just couldn't. It was like, whoa, what happened there? And it wasn't until he looked round, you see half the bar is filled up with zombies, all having a pint. So that was quite funny. But he's very, very professional. Good guy.
And it must have been perhaps one of the more bizarre requests, something like that. It can't be every day that it's zombies attacking someone that also isn't an actor, which must include a lot of extra safety things from your point of view.
Well, because he was always quite a way away. We made sure that there was a significant distance between him and the bullet hits. But the bullet hits, remember, are not. It's only blood that's coming out. There's not anything nasty coming out. But no, I've actually done another one called Devil's Playground. That was fun, nasty. Lots of people being shot and blown up and cut up and hammered to death. I made a hammer that you could hit someone over the head with, and it had a compressed air tube inside. So as you hit the head, you push the button, and blood would go everywhere. That's the sort of thing which is quite fun to do. I can't think what else really. I've tended to do, I suppose, in the last few years, I've done. I did Fast and Furious 6 as a senior technician. And Dumbo as a senior technician. But I also did Burnt as a supervisor. Bradley Cooper, all about cooking, and we actually made this whole thing. It's a whole kitchen which we had to do all gas fed. So So I got in a special gas company to actually plumb it up, and it really worked as a kitchen. And lots of rain and stuff like that for him. And then I did Revolver, which no one understood. Jane Eyre was great. Again, huge rain sequences and bits of fire and stuff like that. Obviously, winches in the house. He said, referring to his piece of paper, because I can't remember what else I've done. Oh, I was in Romania for about 3 or 4 months doing a thing called The Seeker, The Dark is Rising, running the second unit on that. And that was fun and games, all about good and evil and all this sort of business, and massive sets of what looked like caves and all sorts of things. That was fun. Trying to think what else. Okay. Well, I don't know. Dirty War was another one, which was written by the director, actually, and he did an awful lot of research on it. And when we went to do it, the Dirty War was basically about a dirty bomb let off in the middle of London. And when we went to do that, the police got very upset, so did the fire brigade, because they didn't have any protective suits. So if something like that really did happen, they would have had they did have some, but nowhere near, which they now have. They now have everything. They didn't have it, and it took a while for it to be agreed to actually be shot. And we did obviously lots of stuff in the middle of London. I mean, at one point we had, especially all the falling ash from the bomb, and we had huge towers up feeding in black paper, black snow actually is what it was, going over them. I mean, that was really quite spectacular. Massive wind machines, 8 foot across wind machines blowing the stuff around all over the place. And again, more shoot-ups and vans driving through London, and suddenly bullet hits appear right across the windscreens and things like that. And they look really good.
I think it's clear that no two jobs are the same and no two sequences are the same. And I know there's probably an awful lot more we could touch upon, but I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Tony. We've mentioned but a few jobs you've worked on, and certainly things to come. So thank you very much.
Maybe I'll see you again soon.